I want you to see this. All over Israel, there are these massive stones. And there was this word that was connected to these standing stones, so that when students or disciples would see them, they would say this word in Hebrew, masavot. Let me hear you say masavot. And this is what this word, it became synonymous with this phrase, what's happened here? Whenever you saw these massive standing stones, think Stonehenge, you would begin to walk up to them and you'd say, Dad, Rabbi, Mom, masavot. What happened here? He's saying that your life, even though you might be in your school, you might be on your team, you might be in your workplace or the neighborhood, people should see your life and they should say, masavot, what happened there? They should see that you are a living stone, that you are different. You don't blend in, but you stand out. And your life should force people to ask questions. Why do they do that?
Well, hey, what's up, students on all of our 9 CCV campuses? Hope you're having a great Sunday night so far. And as we get started tonight, I thought it was so important to show you that clip. 2 weeks ago, a guy named Steve Carter preached just an unbelievable sermon on this stage. And he talked about this idea of living stones, that Jesus followers were meant to represent Jesus wherever we go. A living representation that was meant to stand out. That as people encountered Jesus followers, they would look at their lives like this image of these living stones in Israel that were stacked all over the place. They were to see Jesus followers and be like, what's different about them? There's something about these people's lives that, I don't know, it's just awesome. And I want to know what it's all about. You see, your life as a Jesus follower was meant to stand out. But I don't know about you, but often I find myself just not feeling that way. I don't know if you've ever been there, but do you sometimes feel like your faith just kind of blends in with the world around you? I think that's a problem. And that really rocks me sometimes. Because Peter was adamant when he wrote his letter to Jesus followers that people should see our lives and say that word that Steve introduced to us, masavot. What happened here? Let me ask you a question. Is your faith noticeable? Is your faith noticeable? And here's the deal. If our faith it just blends in with everybody else, then why would anybody want to be a part of what Jesus followers have? If our faith just blends in, then we'll never make a difference. You see, Jesus didn't change the world by blending in, and neither will followers of Jesus if we're not willing to do stranger things. Do you ever feel strange as you follow Jesus in front of other people? If not, that should be an indicator that you need to work a little bit harder at following Jesus. And this definitely takes place in my life from time to time. So tonight, I want to set up a conversation for all of us to have about how our lives can stand out, how we can begin to do stranger things that people take notice of. And it's just wrapped up in one verse tonight. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. And Peter writes this, and it starts like this. He says, all of you. Everybody say, all of you. Come on, you could do better than that. On every campus, even in Anthem, Scottsdale, Avondale, everybody say, all of you. There we go. Now, who's he talking about, like, specifically? Because I don't think Peter was just saying, like, every human being here. When he says all of you, I think he's talking specifically to Jesus followers, specifically to small groups of Jesus followers. Now, why is he talking to small groups of Jesus followers? It's because in this time period, Jesus followers were under intense persecution around the Roman Empire. You see, the Roman Emperor Nero had it out for Christians. Like, he was burning Christians alive in the city of Rome. He was taking entire families, throwing them in prison, and then gathering a bunch of Romans together in big arenas. And he was taking these Christian families, and he's setting them loose in these arenas with wild animals to be killed for sport. It wasn't popular to be a Jesus follower in Rome in this time. And Jesus followers are beginning to scatter all throughout the empire. And Peter knows this, and he knows, like, I've got to get word out to all the small groups of Jesus followers that are spreading out. So he begins to write this letter, and specifically in chapter 3, he's talking very specifically, all of you Jesus followers. Tonight, I realize there's some of you, you're here and you're not a Jesus follower. And I'm so glad you're here. And I just want you to know that what I'm about to share with you, what you're going to hear from Peter in this verse, Peter is going to start listing off characteristics of small groups of Jesus followers. And listen, you don't have to do this because you're not a Jesus follower. But here's what I want from you, okay? You have a job. I want you to pay really close attention to the list that I'm going to share with you. And I want you to think, is this list from Peter that describes small groups of Jesus followers, does that match up with what I see happening in the lives of Jesus followers at the campus that I'm on right now? Does it match up? Can you do that for me? All right. So Peter's going to make a list here, all right? And I'm going to show you in list form, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. He says, all of you, and he starts with, be like-minded. Be like-minded. In other words, he's talking about unity. The way that we think, what we believe, how we act, we got to be united as small groups of Jesus followers. He goes on. He says, be sympathetic. And what does that mean? It's all about caring. It's all about, like, not having tunnel vision, but seeing other people around you and actually caring, actually getting to know people, actually investing in other people's lives. That's what Jesus followers should do. He goes on. He says, love one another. Maybe one of the most important things spoken of in the New Testament. Love one another. And I think, like, as Americans, when we see the phrase love one another, I think we automatically think romance. I think we think, like, holding hands, making out, listening to country music, you know. But I'm telling you, that's not what Peter was thinking. Though I think Peter liked country music. He would have liked country music. He says, love one another. But the word love he uses is not, in the Greek language, it wasn't the romantic kind of love. It was sacrifice. It was the kind of love where a soldier would lay down his life to protect his brother. It's the strongest form of love recorded in the entire New Testament. Love one another. That should describe followers of Jesus. He goes on. He says, be compassionate. And compassion is all about meeting needs. And when it comes to meeting needs, there's really two things that are in play. Number one, you have to feel something. Like, you have to see someone in need and you got to be like, oh, something should be done about that. So number one, you've got to feel something. The other side of compassion is actually doing something. Feeling something, doing something. When they're together, that's called compassion. Alone, it's not compassion. Jesus followers meet needs. They feel something and they do something. He goes on. This one's a little bit longer. He says, don't repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. This is so intense. And if I could just boil it down, I would just say it like this. Peter's like, don't cause drama. There's so much drama in our world, but Peter is so clear. When drama begins to rise up amongst followers of Jesus, we should be the first ones that end it. Drama should always end with us. So that's the entire verse. Now I just want to put it all together, all right? So if I were to put it like this, he would just say, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, he says, all of you, and then he goes on, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate, don't repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing. And then he puts this like exclamation point on it. He says this, because to this you were called. Jesus followers, every Jesus follower on every campus, to this you were called. You were called to stranger things, to a way of treating one another that's different than everybody else in the world. And I don't know a clearer picture for us today. Like this is written a couple thousand years ago. I don't know a clearer picture today of what Peter had in mind than the small groups that exist on our campuses. There's hundreds of them. Students in circles with coaches, small groups of Jesus followers. And my whole intention of tonight was just to spark a conversation. How are we doing with this? How are we doing with 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8? Are we unified? Are we caring? Are we sacrificial? Are we meeting needs? Are we full of drama? My heart tells me, and I bet if we're all really honest, we have work to do. See, sometimes we're not so unified, and in our groups, there become cliques. Sometimes we get tunnel vision, and we stop investing in other people. We may not even know the names of everybody in our group. Maybe if somebody's been missing from our group for a while, maybe we haven't even noticed. Maybe we've stopped standing up for each other. Maybe if there was a need among us, we wouldn't even know that there is one. Or if there was, maybe we just feel bad. Be like, I'll pray for you. Good luck. And then not do anything. Maybe there's just drama in your group. And what I want tonight, as we go into our small groups, I want us to have an honest conversation. Where are we at with this? Before we go there, I want to answer one more question. Why does this matter? Like, why do we need to have this conversation tonight? There's lots of things that we could talk about. Why are we talking about our small groups? Well, I would say just a couple things. We're having this conversation because if our groups don't line up with these things, then I just believe our groups just blend in. Our small groups, there's nothing unique about them. You can find small groups at your school that are full of drama, that aren't unified, that don't care, that don't meet needs of one another. But when people visit this church, and when your friends who don't know Jesus sit in your small group, do they see this? Or do they see what they see everywhere else? I believe that the first followers of Jesus, their groups grew and grew and grew. Why? Because they did stranger things. I believe that our groups will dwindle if we're not committed to these things. I believe that our groups will fail to grow if we're not committed to these things. Just like Steve said, we're like living stones. We're meant to stand out in our world so that when people start to walk by and notice our groups, they ask, what happened here? What's going on with these people? But listen, if we're, you know where this is going, don't you? If our groups are full of drama, we stand a little smaller. And if we don't sacrifice for each other, we stand even smaller. And if we don't meet the needs of one another, even smaller. If we don't love each other sacrificially, who's even going to notice? If we're not united, eventually, guys, we're just a pile of rocks. And listen, nothing happened here. Nothing. There is nothing to say masavot about anymore. So, in your small group, if there's stones that have been knocked over, tonight is a night to start stacking them. Would you pray with me? Jesus, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for Peter and his instructions for all of us. I pray that kind of like you've worked on my heart this week, I pray that you would work on the hearts of Jesus followers on every campus. Father, I pray for every small group that we'd have an honest conversation tonight, that we would recommit to Peter's lists in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. In Jesus' name. Everybody said.